Hello, hello. All right, we're finishing up our Renaissance unit. So you're going to open the same document that you were working on last time. We're going to finish it today, and you're going to send it to me when you're done. So let's show you. First of all, this document is the one that you should have been working on already. And you should have finished the first few pages here. So we had page 1, we had page 2, and we had page 3 here. So you should have finished those 3 pages there. You should have also had it where you were writing down your answers to the quick checks. And you should also be opening the Renaissance document, and that is going to be starting on page 40. So page 40 is what we're looking at. I also recognize that some of you might find it much easier just going through the PowerPoint yourself and like just kind of more self-directed learning. If that's how you learn best, you're welcome to do that. I'm not going to be offended if you don't watch the video. Just keep in mind, first of all, you need to send me your document when you're done filling it in today. But let's get going here. We are going to take a look, first of all, how did the Renaissance encourage changes in scientific thinking? So, because beforehand, honestly, there's a lot of superstition, a lot of myth around science, quite frankly. And unfortunately, and I'm not trying to say that the church was horrible or anything like that. Like, please hear my heart. There was great things that the church did back then. But there was a lot of superstition, a lot of strange beliefs. You know, even like when we were looking at with Martin Luther and how he was resisting the practice of the indulgences, the indulgence papers, the forgiveness papers. He hated that the church did that, and was becoming like, he felt like the church had lost its true focus, its true purpose when it started doing things like that. And so with that being the case, something to keep in mind though is that challenging the church on what it was teaching about the world or anything like that, that was very dangerous, because there was a lot of power that the church had back then. Keeping in mind how before it was actually almost as if, like, you know, Pope was seen to be the voice of God. And, you know, if you're holding heaven and hell over people's heads, well, then that means that they're going to want to listen to what the church is saying, because they don't want to risk an eternity in hell. And so with that being the case, the church was very powerful, and it meant that it would be very risky to go against the church. So, oops, too far. So we pretty much, even if you didn't understand it, you had to be quiet. You had to keep your mouth shut. Otherwise, you could be labeled a heretic. That could mean death or imprisonment or anything along those lines. And so, yeah, heresy, we have that it's a crime of believing or saying things that go against church teaching. And then the science, like I mentioned before the Renaissance, it was largely based on myth, like really a lot of superstition behind science. And we'll even just think of like the witch hunts in Salem and whatnot, like just ridiculous. Or even how they handled the Black Death plague, where they thought it was caused by bad air, or they did stupid things like having it where they would rub feces, poop on people who were infected and all those kind of stuff. Like, they're just, you know, there's a lot of superstition mixed in with their science. And so what happened is in the day, this is what the church thought. They thought that the earth was flat, that the earth was the center of the universe and everything moved around it, that if you were to do an autopsy, so that would mean dissecting human cadavers, that means dead bodies. If you were to dissect them to be able to find out more about the body and how it works, that was an unforgivable sin. And if you wanted to cure disease, you needed to fast and pray. And yes, I do believe in the power of prayer. I also do believe in the power of fasting. And yes, I do know that that can cause healing within, and when you're focusing on God and spending that time with Him. But you need that balance though between faith, but also sometimes God does have it where He has doctors in place and medicine and things like that. And so anyways, you know, the church very strongly believed that sometimes when it came to disease, that, well, you just needed to pray more. And there's a lot of shame that could be involved with that. And also, again, if you had a disease, well, then that means God's mad at you. So could you imagine? Could you imagine getting sick back then and then having it where people looked at you as if you were some sort of horrible sinner because you must have done something really bad to be able to get a horrible disease? So the shame that would be wrapped around it. And then everything happens for a reason and should not be questioned. So that meant that you were kind of powerless in standing up to people, to authority, especially the church, because everything that happened, even if bad mistakes or whatever it might be, it all happens for a reason. Don't question it. So kind of like blind faith. And again, it goes against what even Paul wrote in the Bible, how he was talking about the Bereans who they were more esteemed than other people in the sense that they took everything he said and they compared it against scripture. They did not just take it at face value. It was not just blind faith. And God never wants our blind faith. All right, moving on. I'm trying not to spend too much time here. We're gonna take a look at the scientific revolution, and that's how some scientists totally changed the way we viewed the world. And so what happens is we have Nicholas Copernicus, and he had it where he challenged the church's teachings about Earth in the universe. So as far as if we were the center of the universe, we're not. He actually believed that the sun was the center of the universe. And he definitely risked heresy with that one. It would have taken a lot of bravery to have it where he stood up against it. Oh no, this didn't load nicely. I am so sorry. Okay, let's see if I can find something else here. Okay, just quickly looked up here. So it's basically what we have nowadays as our model, where we have the sun at the middle and then everything else revolves around the sun. So that's the heliocentric. Helio means star, centric means center. I just went the wrong way. Then we have Johann Kepler, and he used mathematics to prove that Copernicus was right with his theory. And that even though, or also that planets do not orbit in complete circles, so it's not a perfect circle, it's an ellipses. That's how they orbit. So kind of almost more ovular type idea. Gotta love it. This was focusing though on having, let's see if I can find a picture here. Okay, here we go. So here you see how it has it where it's not a perfect circle. It's more like an oval, all right? So that's what it means, that the planets did not orbit in a perfect circle. Sorry, because what it was is with PowerPoint, when I saved it into Google Slides, it just saved funny. All right, then we've got Galileo Galilei. What a name. And so he agreed with Copernicus, and he further proved his theory because he was able to invent the first modern telescope and have it where he used it to discover the other planets and Jupiter's moons, Venus, and the fact that they do in fact orbit the sun. Could you imagine being like the first to discover that, to see that with your own eye through the microscope? Couldn't even imagine. That'd be so cool. Then we got Sir Francis Bacon, and he had it where he changed how we approach the field of science. He created a method to test theories on science. It's called the scientific method. You should have been using that in your science fair projects when you're doing experiments. And so that's where you have making an observation, you're asking a question that you're going to answer, you're making a hypothesis, which is an educated guess. You're going to do the experiment, you have to keep good records while you're doing it, draw a conclusion based on your results, and then you should complete the process again based on what the results say as far as just confirming or denying it. Then we got Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered gravity. And that all matter is going to follow the same rate. So that means like in a vacuum, meaning no outside forces, like no wind or whatever it might be. Does this have a link here? Oh, yes, it does. Sometimes the links work and sometimes they don't. So yeah, the video here ends up having it where it just gives a quick overview of gravity and how it works. Now the next page, unfortunately, the picture's not loading, but what it was is it was a picture of how you have let's say a feather and a bouncy ball. And so if you were to drop it in a vacuum, then they would both drop at the same rate. Whereas obviously when you have outside factors, then it's going to have it where the bouncy ball drops much faster than the feather. Okay, so you need to be answering the question, what caused scientific thinking to change and what major scientific breakthroughs occurred? So I want you to just see if you can answer that question, and you're going to be answering that. Wrong one. Where did it go? Oh, yes. You're going to be answering that one right down here. Okay. Now you should be moving on to page 5. We're looking at how did religious thought change during the Renaissance. So religious thought. I'll probably do a little bit of this here, and then I'm going to end the video and start a new one. So prior to the Renaissance church, the church governed all aspects of everyday life. We know that if you were to question them, very dangerous. You could actually end up having it where you could risk your own life, quite frankly, if you were to disobey or question a religious official. And then what happened is they saw their afterlife, quite frankly, directly linked to the approval of the higher authorities. If they were in good standing with, let's say, the priest or the bishop or whoever it might be, then they felt like, okay, good, I'm set for eternity. That's really what it came down to. They thought that the better they behaved, the more that the authorities approved of them, that they liked them and liked what they were doing, the better they would be in the afterlife. So we obviously learned about Martin Luther, and he was a German monk who was disgusted with some of the practices like the indulgences. Like we definitely saw a lot of quotes by him as far as outrage against the fact that the church was selling forgiveness, really. And that's horrible. That was never meant to happen. I can just imagine Jesus having it where he would blast the church for that, because just like when Jesus went to the temple and overthrew the tables because they had turned it into a marketplace, they were trying to make money off of people trying to get forgiveness for sins. Well, the Roman Catholic Church was doing the exact same thing, just they were selling indulgences. And so what happened is, and they also had it where the more serious the sin, the more money it would cost. So there's some part of me that kind of wonders if some of the churches, like, and please hear my heart, I guarantee you there were a lot of people in the church that were fervent in their belief, and they were amazing believers, and they loved the other people really, really well. I guarantee you there was a lot like that, 100%. And yet I also can imagine that some of them, perhaps, that maybe didn't have their priorities very good. I could totally see some of them being like, yes, we have another person who had a more serious sin. Yes, we make more money. Anyways, that's just my more cynical side coming up here. Okay. So they have it where people are lining up to confess and pay for their sins. And then obviously we have someone who's, I'm sorry for this not loading properly, but we have someone who's trying to make sure, basically it's almost like the idea like of a thesaurus or something like that, where he's like looking to see what it is, like, oh, this is how much it is. All right, so this is how much I'm going to charge you. And then here we have it where at that time, the Bible was only available in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. And so Luther, what he did is he translated it into German, because German was a language that more of the people there spoke at that time. So he made it more accessible to people, which is amazing when you think about it. Like, I love Martin Luther's heart to be able to make sure that people understood the heart of God, as well as being able to make it accessible to read the Bible for themselves. And he also had it where, because really, when you think about it, if you don't have very many translations of the Bible and you can't double check what they're saying with the Bible, you have to take the church officials' word for it. And keep in mind, there's going to be church officials who were totally on the up and up. Like, they were doing their best to be honest and be trustworthy, 100%. But I guarantee you there were also church officials who would have twisted scripture to be able to suit their purposes and make it so that whether it was getting more money for sins or whatever it might be, guaranteed there's going to be some aspect of, misuse of scripture. So the lack of translation is definitely concerning. So Luther ended up having it where we were looking at before. He had it where 95 problems with the church. He called them the 95 Theses. He nailed that list to the front door of the Wittenberg Castle Church. Like, can you imagine? He wrote it all out and wrote it or posted it. He nailed that list to the front of the church. Like, can't even imagine. It makes you wonder what happened to him next. Well, he ended up having it where he started the Protestant Reformation. So Protestant equals protest, Reformation, reform. And so what happened, followers of Luther became known as Lutherans. And that might be something that you're familiar with nowadays. And there's actually over 72 million people who would call them, like, they would have their religious affiliation, which is like a form of Christianity. It's just like kind of like a branch of denomination. They'd be known as Lutherans. All right, so then you're going to have it where you're going to do the quick check number 6, and you're going to look at how did Renaissance thinking impact religious life. I want you to tell me in your own words the Renaissance thinking when it came to just questioning things, thinking for themselves, experimenting, science, all of those different things. Being willing to think for themselves really is a lot of what it comes down to. How did that impact religious life? How did that impact their way of their living out their faith and what they believed and all of those different types of things? Okay, this has been a long video. Thank you for sticking with me. We have one last section. That's it. So I'm going to stop this recording and do one last video.